Clara May Hollister's bare feet knew the earth better than they knew shoes. 19 years of farm work had toughened her soles against rocks and thorns, but nothing had prepared them for a desperate flight across the Texas prairie with her father's shouts echoing behind her. Dawn painted the horizon gold as Clara paused, chest heaving, to extract a mesquite thorn from her heel. The sharp pain was nothing compared to what awaited if Obadiah caught her. His Bible-backed fury, the Blackwood boy's cruel hands, a life sentence of silent submission. She glanced back at the dust rising from horsemen cresting the hill. Her brothers, following their father's command without question, just as they had when Mother died. Clara's bare feet pushed into the earth once more, each step carrying her toward an uncertain freedom. The thunder of approaching hooves made her heart stutter, until she realized they came from ahead, not behind. What would you do if your only choices were submission to cruelty or barefoot flight into the unknown? Clara's desperate escape from her father's farm is just the beginning of her fight for freedom in 1875 Texas, where a woman's worth was measured by her obedience. Will the mysterious rider ahead offer rescue or another kind of danger? Share your thoughts on Clara's courage, and follow for the full story of a woman who discovers that true family is built on respect, not blood, and that sometimes the bravest path begins with bare feet on open ground. Clara May Hollister's calloused bare feet moved silently across the worn floorboards before dawn. 19 years of rising first had taught her to move like a ghost through the farmhouse her father ruled, with scripture and a leather belt. The rooster hadn't yet announced morning's arrival when she began stoking the cook-stove fire, her copper hair pulled back so severely it made her temples ache. "You're burning daylight, girl," Obadiah Hollister's voice cut through the quiet kitchen as he appeared in the doorway, Bible already in hand. 3 years since Mother's passing, and he'd grown harder with each season, like soil baked under the Texas sun. "Yes, Father." Clara kept her eyes on the cornmeal she was stirring. Looking directly at him invited scrutiny she couldn't afford today. "Reverend Sparks says a woman's virtue is in her obedience." He settled at the table, watching her with the same intensity he used when inspecting a horse for purchase. "Seems you're short on both lately." Clara placed his breakfast before him with practiced precision. "The eggs are fresh laid, Father." "Too fresh. Still soft in the middle." He prodded the yolk with his fork. "Near as useless as your mother was toward the end." Clara's fingers tightened around the coffee pot, but her face remained impassive. 4 years of planning had taught her patience. The small bundle hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her bed contained everything she'd need, what little she could gather without raising suspicion. Through the window, she glimpsed her brothers heading toward the barn, James glancing back at the house with something like concern in his eyes. Today the Blackwoods would arrive to finalize her marriage to their son, a man whose hands wandered too freely when they'd met at church socials, whose eyes held the same ownership as her father's. Clara poured the coffee and listened for her moment to run. The sun had climbed halfway to its zenith when Clara heard the words that set her plan in motion. "Take the boys and ride the north fence line," Obadiah instructed her eldest brother Jacob. "I want everything perfect before Silas Blackwood arrives." Clara waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before slipping to her room. Her hands trembled slightly as she retrieved her small bundle, a dress, her mother's silver hairbrush, and 37 cents saved from selling eggs to neighbors when Father wasn't watching. She tucked a folded piece of paper containing her Cherokee neighbor's remedy for fever inside her bodice. She left by the back door, barefoot. Her everyday shoes would only slow her down, and her Sunday pair would be missed immediately. The prairie grass pricked against her soles as she walked casually toward the vegetable garden, then broke into a run when the house disappeared from view. 2 miles to Willow Creek, another 3 to the county road. If she could reach the Thornton property, she might find temporary shelter. Clara ran with the determination of someone who knew this might be her only chance, her copper hair coming loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner of defiance. "Clara May!" The distant shout froze her blood. Someone had returned early. She risked a glance back. Her father and brothers had crested the hill behind her, already spurring their horses forward. Jacob's face was set in grim determination, but James looked torn, even as he followed their father's lead. "Clara May Hollister, you bring shame on this family, girl," her father's voice carried across the prairie. "You'll regret this defiance." Clara ran faster, her bare feet finding familiar paths through the grass, blood beginning to streak her footprints as sharp stones cut her skin. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder behind her. She would not become her mother. She would not surrender. She would run until her heart burst. Clara's lungs burned as she pushed through the tall grass, the sound of pursuit growing ever closer. Her father's horse could easily outpace her on open ground. The creek lay just beyond the next rise, but she wouldn't reach it in time. The sudden appearance of a rider ahead made her stumble. A stranger on horseback emerged from the tree line, a lean man with watchful eyes beneath the brim of a weathered hat. His horse, a muscular chestnut, danced sideways as he pulled it to a halt. "Miss, you all right?" he called, keeping a respectful distance, hands visible on his saddle horn. "They're coming," Clara gasped, glancing back at the dust cloud. "My father and brothers." The man's gaze shifted to the approaching riders, then back to her bloodied feet and disheveled appearance. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Hollister? Obadiah Hollister's your daughter?" Recognition and something darker flashed across his face. "Yes." "Then we need to move. Now." He extended his hand without hesitation, and Clara made the choice that would change everything. She took it. In one fluid motion, he swung her up behind him. "Hold tight, miss." Clara wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse leapt forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them. They crashed through the creek and up the far bank, the rider choosing paths that left minimal tracks. "Name's Ezekiel Boone. Folks call me Zeke," he said over his shoulder as they rode. "Where you headed?" "Away," Clara answered, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Just away." "I know a place." He guided the horse into a stand of cottonwoods. "Martha Lou Kincaid runs Iron Spur Ranch. Your father won't trespass there." "Why help me?" Clara asked, wariness edging back into her voice. Zeke glanced back at her, his expression somber. "Your father's reputation extends beyond his farm, Miss Hollister. Some debts need paying." The sun hung low on the horizon by the time Zeke guided his horse through the gates of Iron Spur Ranch. Clara sat stiffly behind him, every muscle tense from hours of riding and fear. The property sprawled before them, a substantial main house, flanked by a bunkhouse, barn, and corrals that spoke of prosperity unusual for a woman-run operation. A tall figure emerged onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Martha Lou Kincaid cut an imposing silhouette against the fading light, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, weathered face that had seen its share of hardship, and eyes that missed nothing. "Zeke Boone, you bringing trouble to my doorstep again?" Her voice carried across the yard, not unkind but wary. "Found her running from Hollister and his boys, barefoot across Willow Flats." Zeke dismounted and offered Clara his hand. She hesitated, then accepted, wincing as her bloodied feet touched ground. Martha Lou descended the steps, her keen gaze taking in Clara's disheveled appearance and the determined set of her jaw. "Hollister, that explains much." She gestured toward the house. "Come on then, girl. Let's tend those feet." Inside, Martha Lou cleaned Clara's wounds with practiced efficiency, her questions direct. "Are you with child?" "No, ma'am." Clara's voice was soft but steady. "Running from the law?" "No, ma'am. Just my father." Martha Lou nodded, applying salve to the cuts. "Sometimes that's reason enough." She studied Clara's face. "Obadiah Hollister quotes scripture while breaking spirits. Saw it with your mother before you were born." Clara's head snapped up. "You knew my mother? This county ain't that big." Martha Lou's expression softened slightly. "Emma deserved better. Looks like her daughter has her courage, if not her luck." She wrapped clean bandages around Clara's feet. "You can stay, for now, but Obadiah won't let go easy." Clara met her gaze squarely. "Thank you, Mrs. Kincaid." "Martha Lou will do. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we see what you're made of." Clara took her first tentative steps into Junction Springs wearing borrowed boots, 2 sizes too large, stuffed with rags to keep them from sliding off. The main street stretched before them, general store, sheriff's office, church, and saloon forming the backbone of the small community. Morning sun glinted off dusty windows as townsfolk paused their activities to stare. "Stand straight," Martha Lou murmured as they approached the general store. "You've done nothing wrong." Clara lifted her chin, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The store bell jangled as they entered, announcing their presence to the cluster of women gathered near the dry goods. Abigail Montgomery, a sharp-featured woman with an even sharper gaze, abandoned her conversation mid-sentence. "Martha Lou, who's this you've brought to town?" Martha Lou's hand settled firmly on Clara's shoulder. "Clara May, helping at the ranch. Clara, this is Abigail Montgomery, owns the store and most of the town's business." Abigail's eyes narrowed. "Hollister's girl? I heard he's looking for a runaway daughter." Clara remained silent, eyes downcast, feeling the weight of judgment from the women watching. "Then you've heard wrong," Martha Lou replied coolly. "Clara works for me now, fair and proper." An older man with kind eyes approached, medical bag in hand. "Any friend of Martha Lou's is welcome here." "I'm Doc Wilson, miss." Clara managed a small nod as Martha Lou explained. "Clara has knowledge of herbal remedies. Thought you might have supplies we need." Doc Wilson's interest sparked. "Cherokee methods. Always valued their wisdom myself." He guided Clara toward his shelves of dried plants. "Shows good sense, Martha Lou, hiring someone with healing hands." Through the window, Clara noticed the sheriff watching from across the street, his expression calculating. Behind him, Abigail resumed her conversation, eyes darting toward Clara as she whispered to the other women. Martha Lou followed her gaze. "Sheriff Collins is fair enough, but he won't cross the Hollisters without cause. We'll need to tread careful." "Get back!" Martha Lou hissed, pulling Clara into the narrow alley beside the general store. The familiar creak of her father's wagon sent ice through Clara's veins. Obadiah Hollister sat ramrod straight beside Jacob, his Sunday clothes worn for effect, Bible prominently displayed on the seat. They stopped directly in front of the sheriff's office. "Stay here," Martha Lou whispered, positioning herself where she could observe without being seen. Clara pressed against the wall, heart hammering, close enough to hear her father's voice carried on the still morning air. "My daughter's been led astray, Sheriff," Obadiah announced, loud enough for nearby townsfolk to hear. Not right in the mind since her mother passed. Sheriff Collins leaned against his doorframe, non-committal. That's a serious claim, Hollister. The girl's of legal age to hire out her labor. She's promised in marriage. Papers are signed with the Blackwoods. Obadiah's voice hardened. This ain't just about my rights. Their family has claims, too. Clara's breath caught. The arrangement was already formalized. That complicates matters, the sheriff admitted. I'll look into it, but I can't just drag her out of Martha Lou's place without cause. Obadiah leaned forward, lowering his voice, though Clara could still make out his words. Then find cause, Sheriff. Silas Blackwood won't take kindly to this insult. His son's honor is at stake now that people know he was promised damaged goods. Martha Lou's face darkened at the implication. She gestured for Clara to follow her back toward the store's rear entrance. We've heard enough, she muttered. The Blackwoods own half the county's debt. That makes this political. What do we do? Clara whispered, the momentary safety of Iron Spur suddenly feeling fragile. Martha Lou's jaw set with determination. We prepare. If they're bringing the law into this, we'll need more than my reputation for protection. She studied Clara with new intensity. Tell me, girl, how far are you willing to go to stay free? As far as necessary, Clara answered without hesitation. A week had passed since Clara's escape, each day at Iron Spur strengthening both her body and resolve. The morning sun found her in the corral, speaking softly to a skittish mare with an infected leg wound. The ranch hands watched from the fence, their initial skepticism giving way to grudging respect. Easy now, Clara murmured, applying a poultice of crushed herbs. The horse's muscles quivered beneath her touch, but remained still, a far cry from the thrashing resistance it had shown the men. Never seen a horse calm so quick for doctorin', remarked Hank, the oldest hand. Where'd you learn that? Clara smoothed the bandage into place. Cherokee woman lived near our farm. Taught me when no one was watching. Martha Lou approached, observing Clara's work with approval. You've got a gift with animals. Might be worth developing. Clara allowed herself a small smile, unfamiliar after years of careful blankness. My father thought a woman's only gift should be obedience. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Clara tensed instinctively until she recognized Zeke's chestnut gelding. He'd visited regularly, ostensibly to help with ranch work, though his eyes sought Clara out more often than not. "Mornin', ladies," Zeke called, dismounting in one fluid motion. His gaze lingered on Clara, noting her steadier hands, straighter posture. "That mare giving you trouble?" "Not any more," Martha Lou answered. "Turns out Clara has healing hands." Zeke smiled. "Then your father's been missing out on a mighty useful hand." The warmth in his voice made something flutter in Clara's chest, a feeling both welcome and terrifying after years of emotional numbness. Martha Lou caught the look between them, but said nothing. Instead, she turned to Zeke with concern. "What news from town?" His expression darkened. "Blackwood's son is there, looking for Clara and telling tales that paint her as unstable and compromised." Clara's momentary happiness evaporated. "He's lying." "Course he is," Zeke agreed grimly. "But lies travel fast when backed by Blackwood money." The journey to Junction Springs was tense, Clara sitting straight-backed in Martha Lou's wagon. They needed supplies, and more importantly, medicine for Doc Wilson to replace what Clara had used treating the mare. "We can't hide forever," Martha Lou had reasoned. "Sooner or later, you'll face them. Better on our terms than theirs." Clara nodded, though her stomach knotted with each passing mile. The borrowed dress fit better than the boots, at least, lending her a dignity she desperately needed. The first part of their errand passed uneventfully. Doc Wilson greeted Clara warmly, impressed by her knowledge of herbal remedies. They were just leaving his office when a familiar voice boomed across the square. "There's my wayward daughter." Clara froze mid-step. Obadiah Hollister stood in the center of the dusty street, Jacob at his side, performing fatherly concern for the gathering crowd. "Clara May, you're coming home now." His voice carried the absolute authority that had ruled her life for 19 years. She remained silent, trembling despite her resolve. "The poor girl's not right in the head," Obadiah announced to the onlookers, "grief-stricken since her mother passed. Running barefoot across the countryside, it ain't natural." Martha Lou stepped protectively between them. "She seems perfectly sound to me, Hollister." "With respect, Mrs. Kincaid, you don't know my daughter." His eyes narrowed. 3 days she's been gone, and you've harbored her without word to her family." 7 days, Clara said, surprising herself by speaking. Her voice was quiet, but carried in the sudden silence. "It's been 7 days, Father." Obadiah's mask slipped momentarily, anger flashing across his features before the concerned father returned. "See how confused she is. Can't even keep track of time." Clara felt the weight of the town's eyes upon her, some sympathetic, others judgmental, all curious. For the first time in her life, she found herself at the center of public attention, her private suffering suddenly exposed for all to witness. "Clara May, you're confused," Obadiah continued, his voice honey over steel. "These people have filled your head with ideas." Something shifted inside Clara, the weight of 19 years of silence suddenly unbearable. Her voice emerged stronger than before. "I was confused when I believed I deserved your belt for spilling milk. Confused when you said Mother died because she was weak-willed." She took a step forward, each word gaining strength. "I'm seeing clearly now, Father." "Mind your tongue, girl." Obadiah's face darkened, the facade cracking. "I have minded it too long." Clara met his gaze directly for perhaps the first time in her life. "I am not property to be traded to the Blackwoods." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Abigail Montgomery stepped forward, her earlier judgment giving way to a different kind of scrutiny. "Is that true, Hollister? You arranged her marriage without consent?" "She's my daughter," Obadiah retorted. "A father's duty is to secure her future." "The Blackwoods are a fine family. Their son grabbed me at church socials when no one was looking," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Called it sampling the goods. Is that the future you secured for me, Father?" Several women in the crowd exchanged glances, recognition flashing in their eyes. "Ungrateful child." Obadiah took a menacing step forward. "After all I've done—" "That's far enough," Sheriff Collins interrupted, finally moving from his observant position. "This is becoming a public disturbance, Hollister." "She's my daughter." "She's of age," the sheriff countered, "and making serious accusations. Best we all cool down before someone says something they can't take back." Obadiah's fists clenched and unclenched. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only Clara and Martha Lou could hear. "The Blackwoods won't stand for this insult. You've shamed us all, girl." He turned and strode toward his wagon, Jacob following after a lingering look at his sister. The crowd slowly dispersed, but Clara felt something had fundamentally changed. She had spoken her truth, and for once, people had listened. Dusk painted Junction Springs in muted purples as Clara helped Martha Lou load their purchases. The confrontation had left her drained, but oddly lightened, as if speaking aloud had released something long trapped inside. "We'll head back at first light," Martha Lou decided. "Best stay at the hotel tonight. Give folks time to digest what happened. Clara nodded, grateful for the older woman's steady presence. I'll check on the horses. The livery stable was quiet, lantern light casting long shadows. Clara was adjusting her mare's blanket when a hand touched her arm. She whirled, a startled cry rising in her throat. Clara, don't scream. It's me. James stood in the shadows, his familiar face drawn with worry. James. What are you doing here? Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. He glanced nervously toward the stable entrance. Father can't know I'm talking to you. He's... James swallowed hard. He's telling everyone you're unstable. Says that cowboy compromised you. That's a lie! Clara's voice cracked with indignation. I know that. James's eyes, so like their mother's, were troubled. But the Blackwoods believe it. Young Tyler Blackwood is saying his honor requires satisfaction. What does that mean? It means they're not planning to wait for the law. James gripped her shoulders. Father's petitioning the circuit court for guardianship on grounds of mental incompetence. But Tyler's saying if he can't have you proper, he'll take what he's owed another way. Cold fear washed through Clara. They wouldn't dare. The Blackwoods own half the county, Clara. They dare plenty. He pressed something into her hand, a small pouch of coins. Not much, but might help if you need to run further. James. Tears threatened for the first time since her escape. Be careful, sister. Watch your back, especially at public gatherings. He squeezed her hand once more before slipping away, leaving Clara with the weight of this new threat settling heavily upon her shoulders. Outside, Martha Lou called her name, unaware of the darker danger now looming over them. Autumn's arrival brought Junction Springs Harvest Festival, a tradition that predated most buildings in town. Clara stood among a group of women weaving dried grasses and wheat into decorative wreaths, her fingers working with practiced precision despite her inner turmoil. 3 days had passed since James's warning, days filled with wary glances over shoulders and Martha Lou's increasingly watchful presence. Yet the festival couldn't be avoided without drawing further suspicion about Clara's state of mind. That's lovely work, Zeke commented, approaching with armfuls of corn husks for the decorations. His presence at Iron Spur had become so regular that rumors had begun circulating about his intentions toward Clara. She offered a shy smile, the expression still unfamiliar on her face. Just weaving grasses, nothing special. Reminds me of how my mother would decorate, before the fever took her. Zeke arranged the husks on a nearby table, his movements efficient yet gentle. Clara looked up in surprise. You lost your mother too? Yes, but unlike your father, mine taught me that grief shouldn't harden your heart. His eyes met hers with an understanding that needed no further words. I'd like to have met your father, Clara said softly. Zeke smiled. He would have liked you. Said you can judge a person by how animals take to them. Nearby, Abigail Montgomery directed the placement of tables, her attitude toward Clara noticeably less hostile since the confrontation with Obadiah. Several other women had begun including Clara in conversations, sharing subtle nods of understanding or gentle touches of support. For a brief, glimmering moment, Clara glimpsed what belonging might feel like. Martha Lou approached, her expression tense despite the festive surroundings. She leaned close to Clara's ear. Tyler Blackwood just rode in with your brothers. Stay close to me or Zeke. The momentary peace shattered as Clara's gaze snapped toward the main road, where 3 familiar figures dismounted, Tyler's eyes already scanning the crowd for her. The festival continued with forced normalcy as Clara moved between Martha Lou's store booth and Doc Wilson's medicine display, careful to remain in public view. She felt Tyler Blackwood's gaze following her movements, tall and well-dressed in store-bought clothes that set him apart from most local farmers, his handsome features marred by the cold calculation in his eyes. Midday found Clara helping serve stew at the community table when she spotted her father's wagon arriving. Obadiah sat straight-backed beside Jacob, his Sunday clothes and prominent Bible painting the picture of respectability. "Stay calm," Martha Lou murmured, positioning herself strategically nearby. "They won't try anything with so many witnesses." But Clara saw the subtle nods exchanged between her father and Tyler, the way her brothers began circling toward different positions around the festival grounds. They were creating a net, preparing to close in. Zeke appeared at her side. "Time to move, Miss Clara." Back toward Doc's wagon. They had taken only a few steps when Tyler Blackwood blocked their path, Jacob and her youngest brother Tommy flanking him from different angles. "Clara May, you've disgraced your family long enough," Obadiah called out, approaching from behind. Tyler stepped forward, entitlement evident in his stance. "This is the girl who's promised to me. I'll not have damaged goods." "The lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't choose," Zeke said firmly, positioning himself between Clara and Tyler. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," Jacob warned, hand hovering near his belt. Martha Lou's voice cut through the tension. "It's the concern of everyone who believes women aren't cattle to be traded." "We have papers signed," Tyler declared, grabbing for Clara's arm. "She's mine by rights." Everything happened at once. Clara twisted away, Zeke shoved Tyler back, and Jacob's knife flashed in the sunlight. Several women screamed as Zeke staggered, blood blossoming across his shirt just below his ribs. Tyler lunged for Clara again, but Martha Lou's rifle appeared, cocked and steady. "Next one drops," she said simply, and the Blackwood heir froze in his tracks. "Get him to my office, now!" Doc Wilson shouted as men lifted Zeke's unconscious form. Blood soaked through his shirt, leaving a dark trail across the festival grounds. The crowd parted, festival forgotten in the wake of violence. Clara followed, terror clawing at her throat. Inside the doctor's small surgery, they laid Zeke on the examination table. His face had gone ashen, breath coming in shallow gasps. "The blade went deep," Doc Wilson said grimly, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric. "I'm not sure." "I need yarrow and echinacea," Clara interrupted, her tear-streaked face transforming with eerie calm as she assessed the wound. "Do you have them?" Doc Wilson blinked in surprise. "Yes, but—" "And clean cloth, hot water. Now, please." Clara was already rolling up her sleeves, a different person entirely from the frightened girl who had entered. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Martha Lou watched from the doorway, shotgun still in hand. "You know what you're doing, girl?" "Yes." Clara didn't look up as she accepted the herbs Doc Wilson hastily provided. "I've treated worse on animals. The principles are the same." "If I'm to be treated like a horse," Zeke murmured weakly, eyes fluttering open, "at least I'm in good hands." Clara's fingers never faltered as she prepared a poultice of crushed herbs. "Don't talk. Save your strength." She cleaned the wound with steady hands, explaining each step to Doc Wilson as she worked. Outside, townspeople pressed against the windows, watching with morbid fascination and growing respect as Clara stitched the wound closed with tiny, precise sutures. Her focused expression never changed, even as Sheriff Collins arrived to take statements about the attack. Hours later, with Zeke stabilized and sleeping under laudanum, Clara finally allowed herself to tremble, sinking into a chair beside his cot. Martha Lou draped a blanket around her shoulders. "You saved his life," the older woman said quietly. "Folks won't forget that." Evening shadows lengthened across Doc Wilson's office as Clara sat beside Zeke's cot, her vigil unbroken since completing his treatment. His color had improved, fever held at bay by her herbal knowledge, and Doc's grudging approval of her methods. The door opened to admit Sheriff Collins, expression grave as he removed his hat. "Miss Hollister." Clara straightened, instantly alert to the official tone. "How may I help you, Sheriff?" He extended a folded document. "This is a formal summons. Your father has filed a petition with the circuit court." Martha Lou entered behind him, face tight with anger. "On what grounds?" "Mental incompetence," the sheriff answered. "Claims she needs guardianship for her own protection." An older man in a worn suit followed them inside. Judge Thorne, who visited Junction Springs monthly on his circuit. Clara recognized him from previous town gatherings. "Mrs. Kincaid, Miss Hollister," the judge acknowledged with a slight bow. "I shouldn't be discussing this, but you should know the law typically favors paternal authority." Clara's hands stilled on the bandage she'd been adjusting. "Even when the daughter is of age? Even then, if incapacity can be demonstrated." Judge Thorne's eyes were kind but realistic. "The attack today doesn't help your case. Your father claims your irrational behavior provoked the violence." "That's absurd," Martha Lou protested. "Everyone saw Tyler grab her first." "And everyone saw Jacob Hollister stab an unarmed man," the sheriff countered. "The Blackwoods are pressing charges against Boone for interfering with a family matter. It's getting complicated." Judge Thorne sighed. "The hearing is in 2 weeks when I return. Until then, Miss Hollister, I suggest avoiding further public incidents." Clara looked down at Zeke's sleeping form, guilt and fear warring within her. Her bid for freedom had drawn others into danger, yet surrender meant returning to a life worse than prison. "Thank you for the warning, Judge Thorne," she said quietly. "I'll be at the hearing." After they departed, Martha Lou squeezed Clara's shoulder. 2 weeks. We need a strategy, girl, and fast." Morning light filtered through Doc Wilson's office windows as Clara traced her finger along the legal precedents in the law book before her. The doctor had spent the early hours gathering every relevant case he could find, his face growing grimmer with each addition to the stack. Patterson Vitz. "Reynolds, 1872, Doc Wilson explained, pointing to a marked passage. Daughter returned to father despite allegations of mistreatment." Clara frowned. "She was 12. I'm 19. "Whitman case last year," Judge Thorne added, having stopped by before continuing his circuit. He turned the page to another marked section. 20-year-old daughter. Court ruled father's guardianship extended until marriage. Rain pattered against the windows, matching Clara's darkening mood. There must be exceptions. Judge Thorne sighed, removing his spectacles to rub the bridge of his nose. "Few and far between. The law views family unity as paramount." "Even when that unity is enforced through fear?" Doc Wilson closed the book with more force than necessary, frustration evident in every line of his weathered face. "The law is often an imperfect instrument for justice, Miss Hollister." Judge Thorne's gaze was sympathetic but realistic. "I must follow precedent unless given compelling reason to deviate." From the next room came the sound of Zeke shifting in his sickbed, a reminder of how high the stakes had already become. Clara had barely left his side for 3 days, tending his wound with a devotion that spawned whispers throughout town. "Your father will present witnesses regarding your unstable behavior," Judge Thorne continued. The Blackwoods will support his petition. They've already secured affidavits from the pastor and 3 church elders. And my word counts for nothing? Clara asked, her voice hollow. Without evidence of abuse or a legal guardian to counter the petition. Judge Thorne left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy in the air. Clara stared out at the rain, the momentary freedom she'd tasted turning bitter with the realization that the law itself might become her prison. The small room Martha Lou had rented for Clara above the general store felt even smaller as she methodically folded her borrowed dresses and placed them on the bed. Her few possessions fit easily into the same cloth bundle she'd fled with, a reminder of how little of the world she could truly claim as her own. 3 days of legal research had yielded the same conclusion. The odds were overwhelmingly against her. Judge Thorne, for all his apparent sympathy, had never ruled against a father in such cases. The law, created by men for men, saw her as property to be managed rather than a person with rights. Clara sat at the small desk, pen hovering over paper. The decision had crystallized during the night as she'd listened to Zeke's labored breathing from his sickbed. Martha Lou's business was already suffering from the Blackwoods' threats of foreclosure. Doc Wilson had been warned his practice could be shut down for improper treatment methods if he continued supporting her. How many more would suffer for her freedom? "Dear Martha Lou," she wrote, her script neat despite her trembling hand, "you've shown me what a mother should be. I cannot allow your kindness to cost you everything you've built." The second letter proved harder. "Dear Zeke," she began, then paused, emotions she barely understood threatening to overwhelm her. "What might have grown between us will remain my most cherished what-if. Please understand my choice is made to protect you, not because I lack courage." A tear fell onto the page, blurring the ink. Clara brushed it away, sealing both letters before her resolve could weaken. Return to her father, submit to his will, and the charges against Zeke would be dropped. Martha Lou's ranch would be safe. The community could heal its divisions. She had nearly lost her freedom running barefoot across the prairie. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge that some prisons couldn't be escaped, only endured. Dusk gathered as Clara slipped out the back stairs, bundle in hand. Rain had given way to heavy mist that clung to buildings and muffled sounds, providing cover for her departure. She would leave a note for Martha Lou at the livery with instructions to find the letters after she was gone. The streets were largely empty, most townspeople at home for evening meals. Clara kept to shadows, moving toward the edge of town, where she would begin the long walk back to her father's farm. Not surrender, she told herself. Strategic retreat. A sharp cry from a nearby cabin halted her steps. Through a gap in the curtains, Clara glimpsed a young woman cowering as a man loomed over her, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Is that what I deserve after providing for you?" "I'm sorry, Thomas," the woman whimpered, one arm cradling an infant. "The baby was crying. I only stepped away to—" "Excuses!" His hand rose threateningly. "Just like your excuses for the burned dinner, the unfolded shirts. Always excuses." Clara stood transfixed, recognition flooding through her. The woman's posture, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, body making itself smaller, mirrored her mother's, in the years before death had finally granted her escape. The resigned acceptance in her face reflected Clara's own expressions in countless memories. Mother had that same look, Clara whispered to herself, that same voice, that same belief she deserved her suffering. Another woman emerged from a neighboring house, deliberately looking away from the sounds of confrontation. The town's silent complicity suddenly seemed suffocating. Clara's grip on her bundle loosened. If she returned to her father, if she married Tyler Blackwood, this would be her future, and the future of every woman who might have found courage in her defiance. With newfound resolve, Clara turned away from the road leading home and walked purposefully back toward Iron Spur Ranch. Clara pushed open the door to Abigail Montgomery's storeroom with newfound determination. The space was crowded with women, far more than she'd expected. Martha Lou stood at the center, her face lighting with relief at Clara's appearance. "I thought you'd gone," Martha Lou said quietly when Clara reached her side. "I almost did," Clara admitted. "Then I saw what surrender would mean, not just for me." Martha Lou nodded, understanding without further explanation. She turned to address the gathered women. "Ladies, we all know why we're here. What happens to Clara could happen to any daughter." Abigail Montgomery stepped forward, arms crossed. "I've seen Obadiah in church every Sunday for 15 years. Hard to believe. The face men show in public isn't always what their families see at home," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. The room fell silent, all eyes upon her. A slender woman near the back, the shopkeeper's wife, nodded slowly. "That's God's truth. My sister lived with bruises hidden under high collars." One by one, women began sharing stories. Daughters married against their will, sisters who'd disappeared into distant households, mothers who'd faded like ghosts under their husbands' control. Clara realized that her private suffering had never been unique, merely unspoken. Doc Wilson entered, carrying a leather folio. "I've documented Clara's old injuries, consistent with her account." He laid out sketches showing Clara's scarred back, detailed notes of improperly healed fractures. The back door creaked open, and everyone tensed until James's familiar face appeared. He held a worn ledger book, his expression both terrified and resolved. "I have something that might help," he said, approaching Clara. "Father's personal ledger. Shows Clara listed as property alongside livestock. He's kept meticulous records of her market value since she was 12. The women murmured in shock as James handed over the damning evidence. "He'll kill me if he learns I took this," he whispered. Clara embraced her brother. "Thank you for choosing right over easy." Judge Thorne closed his temporary office door and spoke in lowered tones. "There is one legal avenue your father couldn't challenge. A married woman's guardianship transfers to her husband." Clara stiffened. "Marriage? But—" "Just presenting options, Miss Hollister," the judge clarified, raising a placating hand. "The evidence your brother provided is compelling, but precedent still favors paternal rights in most cases." Martha Lou's practical mind was already working. "Zeke Boone has made his interest clear." Clara's cheeks flushed. "I won't use him as escape." "Think on it," Judge Thorne advised. "The hearing is in 4 days." Later that evening, Clara sat beside Zeke on the porch swing at Iron Spur. His recovery had progressed enough for short walks, though the wound still pained him. Sunset painted the horizon in fiery oranges and purples, as Clara explained Judge Thorne's suggestion. "Clara," Zeke said after a moment, taking her hand gently, "I won't pretend this isn't what I've hoped for, but not like this. Not as legal strategy." "I know," she whispered, watching their intertwined fingers. "I don't want to use you as escape." Zeke tilted her chin up until their eyes met. "Then let's not see it that way. Let's see it as a beginning we're choosing, however it came about." "You'd still want me, knowing all the trouble I bring?" His smile was tender. "I wanted you the moment I saw you running barefoot across that prairie, determined to be free. Some things are worth fighting for. The next morning, with Martha Lou and Doc Wilson as witnesses, Clara and Zeke exchanged simple vows in Judge Thorne's office. Doc provided a ring, his late wife's, saved for a worthy cause. When Clara slipped it onto her finger, it felt not like a shackle, but a shield. "Mrs. Boone," Zeke whispered, the name a promise rather than a claim. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe in a future beyond mere survival. Night had fallen by the time Clara and Zeke returned to Iron Spur Ranch. Their wedding day had been spent securing legal documents and preparing for the hearing still to come. Marriage provided protection, but didn't guarantee Obadiah would abandon his petition. Martha Lou had arranged a small celebration with the ranch hands, the simple dinner feeling like a feast after weeks of tension. Clara was helping clear the table when pounding at the door silenced all conversation. James stumbled inside, face bloodied, one eye swollen shut. "They know," he gasped, as Clara rushed to help him to a chair. "Jacob caught me returning the ledger." Clara's hands trembled as she gathered wet cloths to clean his wounds. "I'm so sorry, James. They know I took the ledger. Jacob said he'd finish what he started if I testify." James winced as Clara dabbed at a cut above his eye. "But I'm still going to." "You don't have to do this, James," Clara said softly. "Yes, I do. What Father's doing isn't right." His gaze held a new certainty. "I should have spoken years ago." Martha Lou entered from the front porch, rifle cradled in her arms. "Blackwood's men are threatening foreclosure on half the businesses in town if people support you tomorrow." Zeke frowned. "Will people stand firm?" "Some will," Martha Lou replied grimly. "Others can't afford principals when they've got children to feed." The distant sound of approaching horses drew them all to the porch. Clara stood barefoot on the rough boards, deliberately echoing her first flight. This time, however, she didn't tremble. Zeke's hand found hers in the darkness. "Too many riders for just your father and brothers," Martha Lou observed, counting the distant torches. "Looks like the Blackwoods brought reinforcements." "They're trying to frighten us before the hearing," Zeke said, his free hand resting lightly on his holstered pistol. Clara squared her shoulders. "Then they don't know us very well." As the riders approached, Clara realized that tomorrow's battle wouldn't just decide her fate, but whether any daughter could claim her life as her own. The courthouse in Junction Springs had never seen such a crowd. Townspeople packed the benches, stood along walls, and spilled onto the porch, straining to hear through open windows. Clara entered deliberately barefoot, her copper hair simply arranged, wearing a modest blue dress Martha Lou had helped her finish the night before. A collective murmur rippled through the room at her entrance. Some noticed her bare feet immediately, a silent statement that needed no explanation. She walked steadily to her place beside Doc Wilson, who had agreed to speak on her behalf. Zeke and Martha Lou sat directly behind her, a wall of support. At the opposite table, Obadiah Hollister sat with his lawyer, a thin man brought in from the county seat. Tyler Blackwood and his father occupied prominent positions in the front row, their expressions a mixture of outrage and entitlement. Judge Thorne called the proceeding to order, his face carefully neutral despite the charged atmosphere. "This court will hear the petition of Obadiah Hollister regarding guardianship of his daughter, Clara May." He peered over his spectacles. "I understand there has been a development in Miss Hollister's status?" Doc Wilson stood. "Your Honor, the respondent is now Mrs. Clara Boone, having legally married Ezekiel Boone yesterday." Obadiah's lawyer rose immediately. "Your Honor, we contest the validity of this hasty arrangement, clearly designed to circumvent paternal authority." "Miss Hollister." "Mrs. Boone," Judge Thorne corrected mildly. lacks the mental capacity to enter into marriage contracts. We have affidavits from Reverend Sparks and 3 church elders attesting to her unstable behavior. Obadiah took the stand first, his performance as the concerned father flawless. He dabbed at his eyes while describing Clara's fragile mind since her mother's passing, her unnatural behavior culminating in her barefoot flight across dangerous terrain. "I only want what's best for my daughter," he concluded, his voice breaking perfectly. "Her mind is fragile, her judgment poor." When Martha Lou was called to testify, her steady gaze never wavered. "I've employed Clara May for weeks now. Found her judgment sound, her mind sharp, and her character beyond reproach." The courtroom fell silent as James Hollister took the stand. His face still bore the marks of his brother's beating, the bruises now yellowed against his pale skin. Obadiah's expression darkened at the sight of his second son crossing the invisible line to stand with Clara. "State your name for the record," Judge Thorne instructed. "James Hollister. I'm Clara's brother." His voice was quiet, but carried in the hushed room. "And you wish to testify regarding your sister's mental state?" James straightened his shoulders. "I wish to testify about our father, Your Honor." The Hollister lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection! This hearing concerns the mental capacity of Clara Hollister, not the character of her father." "Your Honor," Doc Wilson countered, "the petitioner's treatment of his daughter is directly relevant to her flight and subsequent actions." Judge Thorne considered briefly. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Hollister." James swallowed hard, his eyes briefly meeting Clara's before facing the crowded room. "My father treated my mother the same way he treated Clara. Controlled every aspect of her life. Punished any disobedience with the belt or worse." His voice grew steadier as he continued. "Mother died 3 years ago, not from fever as was claimed, but from injuries sustained after questioning father's decision to sell her family locket." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Obadiah's face flushed dark with fury. "That's a filthy lie," he shouted, half rising before his lawyer restrained him. "I have this," James continued, producing a small journal from his pocket. "Mother's diary. She documented everything, knowing someday someone might need proof." As James read selected passages detailing years of abuse suffered by both mother and daughter, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. Women exchanged knowing glances. Men looked uncomfortably at their boots. Tyler Blackwood and his father slipped quietly toward the exit, distancing themselves from the increasingly damning testimony. When James finished, tears streamed openly down his face. "I was a coward for not speaking sooner. I won't be silent anymore." Judge Thorne's expression remained impassive, but his eyes had hardened as he studied Obadiah Hollister with new scrutiny. "Mrs. Boone, would you like to speak on your own behalf?" Judge Thorne asked when all other testimony had concluded. Clara rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. Her bare feet pressed against the rough wooden floor, grounding her in the moment. She had spent her life being spoken for by her father, by the church, by society's expectations. This moment belonged to her alone. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I stand before you barefoot today by choice. The same feet that carried me across the prairie toward freedom now carry me toward truth." She gestured toward her father. "Obadiah Hollister taught me that a woman's highest calling was obedience, that my worth lay in my utility to men, first to him, then to whatever husband he chose for me." Her eyes swept the courtroom, finding unexpected strength in the faces of women nodding in silent understanding. But a father's love shouldn't leave scars. A husband's protection shouldn't feel like a cage. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I've discovered that true family is built on respect, not control. On love freely given, not obedience demanded. Clara turned to face the judge directly. I don't ask for special treatment, Your Honor. I ask only for the right all people deserve to determine my own path, to choose who shares my life, to build a family based on mutual respect rather than fear. She gestured toward Martha Lou, Zeke, and the women who had supported her. I found my true family. Not in the blood that runs through my veins, but in the hands that lifted me when I fell, the voices that spoke truth when others demanded silence, and the hearts brave enough to stand against injustice. As Clara concluded, the courtroom remained perfectly still. Even her father sat motionless, as if seeing his daughter clearly for the first time. Judge Thorne studied her for a long moment before speaking. Thank you, Mrs. Boone. This court will render its decision. Spring came early to the small homestead Zeke and Clara built at the edge of Iron Spur Ranch. Wildflowers dotted the prairie where Clara had once fled barefoot, now transformed into a symbol of hope rather than desperation. Judge Thorne's ruling had been clear. Clara was a competent adult, her marriage valid, and Obadiah's petition dismissed. The precedent, while narrow, opened possibilities for other women seeking escape from control disguised as protection. Clara's garden flourished beside the cabin, medicinal herbs growing alongside vegetables. Martha Lou visited often, bringing news from town and motherly advice Clara had never known. Most surprising was the tentative reconciliation with James, and eventually even Jacob. Their father remained unyielding, but the brothers had begun to forge their own paths. As Clara worked in her garden, a rider approached, a young woman, barefoot and desperate-eyed, having heard stories of the sanctuary offered to those in need. Clara rose to meet her, understanding in her eyes, ready to continue the cycle of refuge and empowerment that had begun with her own desperate journey across the prairie. Well, friend, we've walked a dusty trail together alongside Clara May Hollister, her bare feet marking every step of her journey from desperate flight to hard-won freedom. If you're feeling a bit worn from all that emotion, Clara's fear, Martha Lou's fierce protection, Zeke's steadfast loyalty, the weight of standing against tradition, I understand completely. Telling this story has left me changed in ways I'm still discovering, and I suspect Clara's journey might have stirred something in you too. There's something about the frontier that strips away society's polite fictions and reveals the raw truth beneath. Clara spent 19 years being told her value lay in obedience, convinced that her fate was sealed by birth and gender. But freedom isn't about escaping physical constraints. It's about finding the courage to claim your own life when everything and everyone tells you that you have no right to it. And that choice arrives for all of us, doesn't it? That moment when we must decide whether to accept the life others have designed for us or risk everything for the chance to write our own story. What struck me most while crafting Clara's tale was how isolation nearly broke her, while connection saved her. We aren't meant to fight our battles alone. Martha Lou, Zeke, James, even Doc Wilson. They didn't just offer Clara protection. They showed her a vision of what family could truly be. Sometimes the people who become our chosen family see strengths in us we never recognized in ourselves. Writing about women in the 1875 frontier made me reflect on courage in our own time. The legal and social constraints Clara faced may have changed form, but the fundamental struggle for self-determination continues. We all face moments when standing for our truth means risking comfort, security, even relationships. Clara's Texas prairie might be long gone, but her barefoot journey toward freedom remains as relevant as this morning's sunrise. In the end, Clara May discovered what women throughout history have learned when brave enough to take that first step. We aren't defined by others' expectations, but by the paths we dare to create for ourselves. Freedom isn't given, it's claimed, one difficult choice at a time. Thank you for walking this trail with me, friend. Stories only truly live when they find readers willing to invest their hearts in characters fighting to become their authentic selves. Your willingness to follow Clara from her desperate barefoot flight to that powerful courtroom stand transforms mere words into something that matters. Clara's story reminds us that sometimes our most desperate moments become the foundation for our greatest strength. Those barefoot steps across the prairie weren't just an escape. They were the first steps toward becoming someone new. We all face moments when we must choose between the safety of the familiar and the uncertain promise of freedom. What's the hardest choice you've ever made to claim your own path? Share your story in the comments, because courage deserves to be honored, whether it happened on a Texas prairie or in your own life. If Clara's journey toward independence stirred something in your spirit, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing. History is filled with untold stories of women finding their voices against impossible odds, and I'd be honored to share more of them with you. Until next time, may your path be clear and your spirit as free as Clara's when she finally stood barefoot in that courtroom, claiming her right to choose her own destiny.